Hi there, you're listening to the Estranged Heart podcast, and I'm your host, Kreed Revere. Welcome back to our returning listeners, and if this is your first time here, thank you for selecting this podcast to listen to. As we begin today's episode, I invite you to grab a cup of coffee or tea, settle in, and listen with an open heart. But first, the regular disclaimer. I am not a licensed therapist or counselor. Nothing within this podcast should be considered or taken as therapy. If you are in need of therapeutic support such as counseling, please seek out a therapist near you. Today's episode is part 2 of the interview with an estranged adult daughter, an adult daughter who is estranged from her dad, and they have been estranged for just under a decade. And what struck me with her story was the compassion that she was able to find for her dad, even though the potential for them to reconcile is probably slim to none. Caveat, there is a trigger warning. There's some domestic violence and alcoholism that is discussed in this episode. So if that's triggering for you, please, I urge you to not listen if you feel that it would do more harm than good. If you are an estranged parent, I really hope you can find some takeaway nuggets from her interview and things that she talks about and says. And if you haven't already listened to part 1, I highly encourage you to listen to that, because that gives the history of the relationship. And then this part 2 is talking more about kind of where things are at today. So part 1 is very important. With that being said, as a reminder, if you are in need of or searching for support groups or one-on-one individual coaching, please feel free to reach out. A new cohort of support groups will begin in September. If you'd like to get on the wait list for those, please let me know. Information will be in the show notes. You can also find information on the website, and you can email me. Email address is theestrangedheart@gmail.com. Again, theestrangedheart@gmail.com, and the website is theestrangedheart.com. So with that being said, I think that's everything. On to today's episode. Take us through to kind of where the estrangement begins to settle in, and kind of what's happening in your life, where are you at in your life, and kind of any conversations that you've had with dad around the fact that you can't have a relationship with him.
Yeah, there's been so many things. It's just like, I can't tell you how many times he said he was going to get sober. For instance, that was a big one. He would tell me, okay, I'm going to get sober. And I was all supportive. Okay, Dad, I'm on board. Let's, we want to see you get better.
Mm-hmm.
And then he'd start drinking again. And so it was a lot of breaking down of the trust of, he's getting better. No, he's not. He's getting better. No, he's not. Mm-hmm. And so in my 20s, from like 18, 19 to like basically after my parents split up, till about 26-ish, I had a really rocky relationship with him. We were in contact, but I really just avoided him a lot. Mm-hmm. Sometimes we'd, go out for meals or something, or I'd see him on holidays. And then, but there was still a lot. I mean, the behaviors were continuing, the going on rampages were continuing. My mom wasn't with him anymore. I wasn't living with him anymore, but my sister still lived there. So, it was, now I have to protect my sister from afar. And so those things would still happen. And so that would also hinder our relationship. If there was anything that was being mended, every time there was a blowout, it was shattered all over again.
Right.
And it wasn't until I was right before I was pregnant with my daughter, my husband at the time and I were struggling financially, and he lost his job and my job wasn't making enough for the both of us. And so we ended up, thankfully our apartment place worked with us. We're like, if we just leave, can you like avoid putting eviction on our credit and everything else, and we'll just get out, and they worked with us, thankfully. And so we went to my dad's house. My dad's like, oh yeah, you can come live here. And he let us have the master bedroom because we also had 2 dogs and a cat. And my sister had a pretty aggressive dog that lived there, so our animals had to be in our room. And so we were married and all this stuff, so my dad let us have the master bedroom, which was kind of like a studio apartment, and that's and at first things were okay. You always, so the thing that I've learned about the cycle of abuse is there's the honeymoon period. After, so things were okay. We were trying to, me and my then husband were trying to get back on our feet and everything else. And my dad said, okay, well, I'm not going to charge you rent because, you're getting back on your feet. Now, see, that's the thing. That's one of the many issues with my dad, is that he never keeps his word. So while he said we didn't have to worry about rent, and he knew neither of us had a job at the time, or because the job that I did have was in a different county. So like we're starting over, right? All of a sudden, within like the first month, he's demanding some kind of rent. And so that's one thing that he's really big on, is if he's in a good mood, he'll make all these promises. And maybe even, I don't know if it's even when he's sober, but when he's in a bad mood, all his promises don't mean anything. And it's whatever he says goes. And so it was that big hit of, oh my gosh, we're basically stuck under his roof. And now this is what we are going to be dealing with. And it didn't help that my then husband at the time was just starting to show off the same behaviors as my dad. So now I'm stuck between the two of them. My daughter's dad was, and I didn't know this until much later on, but he was using opioids. So there was addiction on both ends there. But so I was getting the tiptoeing around my dad and the tiptoeing around my husband. And then I got pregnant. So it was right after I left that situation, after I had my daughter, that because things at my dad's house, it didn't matter that I was pregnant. He would still go off and have these really scary episodes. And he was always trying to so my husband had, couple years prior, had broken my dad's nose, and it was like totally one of those justified moments. Probably as a kid, I kind of felt like the hero in that moment, like, oh my gosh, finally someone got him. And it wasn't he warned him. My dad was in one of those moods and was coming at him, and my husband was like, I'm going to hit you if you keep coming towards me. You need to back up, and then he finally hit him. And so at the time I thought, oh, he can't touch us, we're good. Unfortunately, my husband had a domestic violence felony on his record. So now that we're living under my dad's roof, he would purposely try and antagonize my husband, knowing that he could call the police and report him. So then no one could fight back against him. Didn't matter what, because he had something on him, you know what I mean? So we were all on eggshells with my dad. And even when I was pregnant, and I still remember there was one time where my dad was banging on all of the doors, screaming at the top of his lungs. I was like 35 weeks pregnant. I was stressed. As a pregnant woman in your 3rd trimester, that is the worst time to have stress of your life, literally on the line. And so I remember I was at one point contemplating, can I crawl out my window 35 weeks pregnant? Because I didn't know what to do and things were escalating. So I made the decision right then and there that my daughter would not know her dad. Her daughter would not know her grandpa. She would not know. She would not live in this house. She will not live in this house. I do not want her to ever experience this. And so my mom and I worked it out, because my mom lived in a senior plus community center because she'd helped my grandma. So that's why her place wasn't really an option, but it was we found a loophole where I could stay with her for 2 months. That was the max. And so that was like, okay, in 2 months, we got to figure out someplace else to live. But the moment I had my daughter, I moved to my mom's house. And that was really the start of the estrangement, was you will not know her. In fact, he came to the hospital when I gave birth to my daughter, and all the staff knew if he came, make him leave. He's not welcome. And that was really just the start of it. I think becoming a mother was such a big thing for me that it was like and it's crazy because as a parent now to an almost 8-year-old, to, you know, the age where I really started to see this behavior in my dad, I cannot imagine doing the things or saying the things that my dad said to me. I just cannot, as a parent, I cannot fathom it at all.
Yeah.
But I think that was the start of it. That was the, you will not bring this into her life.
Yeah. And that's not uncommon. It's that is another time in life when I see estrangements occurs when the adult children are having children of their own, and they are adamant that, you know, it's almost like the mom who says, you know, you can treat me bad, but you can't treat my kids bad, right? Like to a husband.
Right.
And so I tend to see a lot of estrangements occur when adult children are having their own families and creating their own families, getting married, having children, that kind of thing, to not bring them around whatever types of behaviors are happening with a parent. So, okay, so tell us kind of as we begin to wind down here for today, tell us about kind of some reflections you've had, maybe how some of the experiences that you've had in your life that as a child that affected you, that you had to do healing work around. Like help us to understand how you've gotten to this place where you're good with being estranged. You do not have an interest in having a relationship with your father moving forward. And if there's anything that your father could do that would allow you to have a desire to want to have a relationship with him, if anything, I don't know.
Yeah, I think for me, a big part of it was really finding my spirituality, which happened about 4 years ago. And this is just me, and it's not like any particular religion, just I found my root belief in where I belong in the universe, and you know, my belief in what we're meant to do here and be here as souls, and what we're, you know, like that really helped me understand this idea of, you know, it helped me see him as a human being, and helped me see, you know, like kind of what we talked about a little earlier, that this was all of his behaviors is showing up as past hurts.
Yeah.
And it does not okay it at all or condone it. I mean, I still have serious fears about him really hurting my sister, you know, because she's living there. You know, so I still fear him. I struggle a lot with a lot of anger towards him and everything else. But underneath it all, I also know he's human. And I also know that there are reasons why he's making the decisions he's making. But the spirituality piece really gave me the peace that I needed. You know, not to say that I don't still have huge feelings around him and around what he's done. And I mean, there's I feel like this healing is probably gonna be like a lifetime's worth of healing, because so much there. And I was gonna say something, I lost my train of thought. Yeah, so that has really helped me. And also, interestingly enough, parenting my daughter has helped me too. I had no idea how much trauma my little me still has, you know, inside me. Like, for instance, like there are moments where I do get overly angry at my daughter and I yell to a point where I shouldn't. And I don't like it because I see my dad in myself when that happens. Now, granted, it's nowhere, like in reality, it is nowhere near the same spectrum, but it's enough where I'm like, I don't like how that makes me feel. And not only that, then there were moments where, because I'm parenting my daughter differently, I'm really big on repair. So even when I do overdo it, you know, we have a conversation. And I mean, I don't tell her what she, you know, we'll talk about what she did. Like, hey, you know, this behavior, we got to work on this. But the way that I responded wasn't appropriate. Like, no one should yell at you like that.
Right.
that was, and I'm sorry that I lost my temper. And but there's the little me, my little inner child will sometimes throw a tantrum like, we didn't get that when we were
Yeah.
kids.
Yeah.
Why is she getting off the hook? Why is
Mm-hmm.
she getting easy treatment? And it was the first couple times I experienced that, I was like, whoa, what is that? And I realized a lot of times when I do overdo it with her, it's because that inner me is like taking the reins for a second.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
being aware of that has been a huge stepping stone too in that healing aspect of like, because if that's what I'm experiencing, but I'm more aware of it and I'm able to check myself, what was my dad experiencing in those moments?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
What little versions of him? Because, and that's another thing I have noticed, that when I have seen him, my sister sometimes sends me pictures of him when he's going out of control, or not pictures, but videos. I just see a toddler,
Right.
basically.
Right.
It's someone in an adult man's body having a meltdown like a toddler who doesn't know how to regulate their emotions.
Yeah.
And, so what happened to him in his childhood where he didn't get that healing, where he didn't get that, and again, it's hard because it's like, I still have so much anger and so much,
Mm-hmm.
all the things, but I am able to at least see glimpses of that. Like
Yeah.
what is going on inside of him that makes that he's not aware of, that is taking the reins because he's hurting and he wants everyone else to hurt too, because that would make him feel better.
Right. Yeah.
Um,
That's some phenomenal awareness to have. And that's yeah. Anytime I see anyone now having a meltdown, an adult having a meltdown, that's one of the first things I do is I'm like, is this an 8-year-old? Is this a 15-year-old? Is this a 3-year-old? Regardless of how old they are, right? Because I do this with my dad, who's almost 80, and he'll have a meltdown. And I'm like, this is totally a 5-year-old throwing a fit. That's exactly what is transpiring. So it helps me to then be able to keep myself in check, recognizing this is a little boy in a man's body that is doing this, right? And to not lash back out at him, right? Kind of thing. So, but having that awareness is huge. And that is in the work that I do with parents, is helping them to understand when their children are lashing out, what is actually happening. It's not their 40-year-old adult son that's having a temper tantrum. It's the 8-year-old little boy inside them that's having the temper tantrum. So that's fabulous. Um, Talk to us about kind of where things are at today. Do you think that, what would it take for you to have a relationship with your dad,
it's a
if
really,
anything?
yeah. So my really small backstory, but about a year ago now, actually, to the day almost, my sister got out of a really bad abusive relationship that I helped her with. I had to tow her car like 80 miles. And so unfortunately that meant that, well, because I had to be there at the tow truck, I had to go to the house. And
Mm-hmm.
okay, I'm going to have to see my dad. And, it wasn't a bad experience. There was definitely this like, so many emotions came up. It was like the part of me that really wants a relationship was just like trying to see, is this possible? Maybe he's doing better, because my sister hadn't lived with him for a couple months. So I hadn't heard of any outbursts or
Right.
anything, you know what I mean? And, so we just had like a really awkward conversation, kind of like when you don't really know someone,
Mm-hmm.
kind of
Mm-hmm.
asking how how we're doing and stuff. And then I had to drop something off to my sister. So when I drove by, I had my daughter in the back seat of the car and he got to say hi to her through the window, and talk to her. Um, but then like 1 or 2 weeks later, there was another big blowout at the house. And not only that, but I had learned, which I kind of knew, I wish I knew this a little prior before I let him say hi to my daughter. There's also a whole other aspect that I hadn't even touched on of inappropriateness from my dad too. Older, he's gotten me, and I know that, but I mean, neighbors moved because he kept watching over the fence and things like that. So
Right.
that's that right there is probably the biggest reason I probably never can have a relationship with him, because of my daughter, because I've experienced, not as a child, but as a adult, there were some inappropriate moments with him that I, you know, just scarred me. And so I think that's probably the biggest reason I never could open that door.
Mm-hmm.
Um, if he ever were to truly get sober, because I do think a lot of that is the alcohol, not to say that
Yeah.
it's it's covering up for something. So I do think a lot of these behaviors are, there's a reason they're there. And so,
Yeah.
you know, I still wouldn't trust him in some of these behaviors. But, you know, if he were to ever truly get clean and actually start taking responsibility for, because right now he's still very much in the idea of everyone's abandoning me.
Mm-hmm.
He
Yeah.
doesn't see why. Like, even his family that's very enabling have really pulled back because of his behavior. And some of them have even gone no contact.
Mm.
So, you know, he's really ending up alone. I mean, he's
Yeah.
lucky my sister is still there, and I'm praying for her to get out as soon as she's, you know, feels she's capable. But, you know, because, you know, unfortunately, he's, by his own design, by his own behavior, he's putting himself in this position where no one really wants to deal with him, which is really, I mean, coming back to that compassion point, that's just heartbreaking that
Yeah.
that's where he's at. But it's also by his own doing.
Right.
So
Well, and this is the thing, you know, we and I tell parents this too, if there's any sort of abuse that's happening from their children, um, you know, we all have to have boundaries. We all have to do what is working for us and making our lives doable without the added stress of a particular relationship. Now, is that what I would like ideally to have happen in this world, that everybody just goes their own individual way and that type of thing? No, absolutely not. However, when we're dealing with people who refuse to take accountability, refuse to look inward, right? Like we gotta we gotta look in before we can look out in healthy ways. Um, it makes it forces our hands. We get to a place where we're like, this is not ideally what I would want to have happen, but my hands have been forced. I can't live like this and myself be happy and healthy mentally and emotionally if I stay in this relationship. And is that's that's the point of all of this, is to say when we all do our own healing work, that's where the magic happens. That's the transformation that is available to us. But we have to want it and be able to have the courage to step into it. And without that, oftentimes we're left with relationships that are broken and we cannot move forward with them.
yeah, that's really where it's at. I mean, there's still a part of me that wishes things were different. And I'll be honest, Father's Day is a really difficult year for me. Some years it's like extremely painful. Other years I'm able to just try to work it like a normal day and just pretend like it's not about amazing fathers out there that I never had. You know,
Right.
and um just as an example, my partner, he's really he's really into like zombie movies, so like, or shows, and I'm like, not really my thing. But he got me into this one show called The Last of Us, which is actually, you know what, for being a zombie movie, it's a lot more about the people than the
Mm-hmm.
zombies. So, all
Mm-hmm.
right, this is pretty good so far. But there's this relationship. It's not a father daughter, but it's a father daughter dynamic.
Mm-hmm.
He loses his daughter in the very beginning, and then he ends up helping a child like 20 years later who is like the same age as his daughter who died.
Right.
And there was this episode that we just watched just last night where it really hit me like on this really deep emotional level. He ended up rescuing her from this bad situation that she got taken into. And it was just that he just immediately went into that protector father role for her. And it's funny because I didn't necessarily like, I knew what I felt in the moment, but I think I was like, I'm not going there, but it's been sitting with me since I watched that episode that like, God, that's what I want.
Right.
More than anything. I want that, and I've done that many times where I watch movies where I love the father-daughter dynamic. And I just feel like there's this huge hole. Like, God, I just want it. I want that. That's what I want.
How did I get cheated out of that in life? Right. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
There's a point in time when I was younger where I used to imagine, oh my gosh, what if my mom marries somebody else and, and get a stepdad? I was a grown woman at this point thinking this, but,
right.
and that's probably, I don't know if that'll ever happen because my mom's never dated since she's, so she may never, but there is still that part of me that's like, I just want a healthy relationship with, if it can't be with my dad, then with some other father figure,
right.
which I don't know if that'll ever come for me. But, I do when I watch movies and things like that. That's when I notice it the most, where I'm like, God, that's what I want.
Yeah.
It's just heartbreaking that wasn't the hand that I was given this lifetime.
Well, Sarah, thank you so much for sharing your story. I wish you a way to find that peace that you've been searching for your whole life, right? The peace and relational peace when it comes to your father, a father role in your life, because our parents play pivotal roles as children and as adults. And ideally, it's healthy to have our parents involved in our life if they are healthy in mind, body, and spirit. And oftentimes they're not. And so I know how hard it is to want a particular type of relationship with a parent that you don't necessarily have. And it's finding a way to make peace with that and coming to an acceptance that this is, as we said, this is the hand that I was dealt, and this is where I'm at. So, I hope your dad, maybe one day, it's never too late. I always say, as long as there's breath in us, it's never too late to make a change. And maybe one day he'll wake up and have that aha moment in his life where he will take action to course correct. And if he doesn't, I hope that you find a way to make some peace with where you are in relationship with your father. So thank you again for coming on and sharing your story and allowing my listeners to have an inside view as to what it's like to have a parent that's an alcoholic and what childhood was like for you and your adulthood, having to deal with some of those things. Thank you.
Thank you for giving me the platform to share my truth. This is the first time I've put it out there, so I do appreciate the space to talk about it. And I do hope that if nothing else, because I know that there's no void that can be filled for something like this, but if nothing else, maybe someone who listens to this maybe won't feel so alone.
Yeah. Oh, beautiful. Such courage to be able to share our stories. So thank you. Thank you for demonstrating such courage and compassion, because I know it's there as well. Okay. All right. This brings this episode to a close. I hope that this time together was time you feel well spent, and that you are able to find some takeaway nuggets to help you on your journey, wherever you may be on your estrangement and reconciliation path. If you feel you've received something helpful or positive from this podcast, please consider following us, sharing this podcast with others, leaving a positive review, perhaps entertaining becoming a guest on our show, or following us on social media, on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok under the same name, The Estranged Heart. As a reminder, there is an online support group on Facebook. If you are a estranged mom who identifies as being spiritual and approaches estrangement with a sense of curiosity rather than blame and judgment, and desire to do inner self-work and reflection, please seek us out. We can be found at facebook.com/Estranged Mothers Support Group. And lastly, if you are an estranged parent or an estranged adult child and would like to have your story shared on the podcast, anonymously or not, please reach out to me via email at theestrangedheart@gmail.com.